Hello, welcome to my channel. I thought I would do a follow-up video to something I filmed earlier in the year where I talked about how I transitioned to being an Apple user for my computer as opposed to a Windows user, which I've been over the past 30 years. And so if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that video, take a look at it. I go into pretty good detail about how I came to be in Windows for so long and why I'm making the transition now. But since we're 6 months since I've made that transition, I just thought I would do an update. And I'll just say right off the bat, I don't have any regrets about the move. I'm glad I've done it. What I do want to do in this video to kind of tack on to what I talked about before, though, is I do want to talk about first the stoplight functions, which is something I've actually had to learn over time, at least some of the nuances of it. So I'm going to talk about that here. And then we're going to talk about some critical shortcuts that I use that make things a lot easier. Shortcuts that for the most part I used similar versions in Windows, and it took me a little bit of time to figure them out here. So I thought I would share those for anybody maybe thinking or having just made the transition to Apple that might be helpful. And then I'll make a few final comments and we'll just kind of close things up. So this is just basically a follow-up video, an addendum, if you will, to that original video. And I think you might find it interesting. All right, let's go ahead and dig on in. So the one thing that took me a while to get used to is the stoplight feature, which is just my phrase for it. I don't know what the technical name, but it's the red, yellow, and green buttons that you find in the upper left corner of the screen, or the upper left corner of whatever window that you're working in. This basically has some obvious functionality, but it has some functionality that isn't quite as obvious. So I thought I would talk a little bit about that. And we'll start with the red light. So the red light, as you might expect, closes something down, but it's not the application in most cases. What'll happen when you use the red light, and I have Excel up here, is that this particular spreadsheet will be closed, but the Excel file itself will remain open. So let's go ahead and do that. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the red button, and I'm not going to save this. I'll just go ahead and get out. And it's gone. But you might notice that there's a little dot underneath the Excel icon. So the application itself is still open. So the red dot does not close the application. How you have to close an application is one of two ways. One way is I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and you can see up here it says Excel. So I know that's my active application. I could then go to the word Excel, click on it, and then go down to Quit Excel. So that's one way of closing the application, and indeed you see there's no dot under Excel any longer. There's also a keyboard shortcut which is really awesome, and we'll get to that in the next section. But just know that the basic idea is that the red light only closes that window or that instance or what have you of that application, not the application itself. Okay, so that then takes us to the yellow light, and this is the one that probably took me the longest to fully appreciate. Now, the basic idea of the yellow light is pretty simple. It's going to minimize that screen. So I'll go ahead, I'm here in Microsoft Word, and I'm going to click on the yellow light to minimize it, and it's gone. Now, you might notice that it has actually been included over here down below in the application tray. So I can click on that at any time to bring back that window. And I'll go ahead and do that now. But there's another interesting twist to the yellow light, which I didn't appreciate before, and it took me a long while to learn. So before we get to that, let me pause here for a second. Now, there's a gesture that you can do, which is using your 3 fingers and swiping up here on the trackpad. And what that will do is it will take all the active applications and lay them across the screen, at least the ones that are on the desktop. If there's anything that's kind of off to the side, then those will appear up above, and I can go ahead and put the cursor there and you get a much larger view. So these are any type of applications that are filling the entire screen. So we'll get to that when we get to the green button. But for right now, everything on the desktop appears here. And we'll go ahead and go back to that. Now, all these applications are kind of oddly arrayed and in different sizes. And I remember when I saw videos on YouTube kind of showing this in action, I thought, oh my God, what a mess this is. Because there's no, or at least I'm not aware of any rhyme or reason about why one app is smaller than the other. In some cases anyway. This app in particular is smaller because the window, when fully enlarged, it doesn't fill the entire screen. But there are other ones that are smaller and it doesn't always make sense why. And of course the order isn't clear to me either. Regardless, I've actually been surprised at this. This has been one of the easiest ways to identify the application I'm looking for and to be able to jump right in, like I have here with News Plus. Okay, let's pause then and go back to where we were with the yellow light. So I'm going to go ahead and take this Word document and minimize it. Okay, so again, it appears down here on the tray. If I go ahead and use those three fingers to see all my active windows in the desktop, the minimize window does not appear there. This is pretty cool for me because I'll give you an example. Maybe I'm working on a project and I'm pausing on that project. So maybe I'm using Excel, I'm using a particular workbook and a particular Word document. And I don't want to close them. I don't want to close everything out and have to relaunch it maybe a few days later. But I also don't want to deal with the junk, as I'm, going through my other windows that I am actively using. So by minimizing those, you can basically set them aside so they're not in the way when you're working on your other windows, but they're right there available whenever you need them. So that was one aspect of the yellow light I just didn't learn about until recently, actually, and I think it's pretty cool. And of course, that takes us to the green light. And this one was actually probably more obvious, but there are just a couple nuances to it. So the green light is the one that basically allows you to size the window in various configurations. So if I go ahead and take my cursor and put it over the green light, you see that there's a couple rows of options. The first row is simply saying, what do you want to do with this active window? Do you want to put it to the right? Do you want to put it to the left, up, or down? That's what the first row is doing. The second row is saying, okay, what do you want to do with this screen? And also we'll go ahead and arrange the remaining screen or screens, in the case by a 2x2 grid. So it's not just impacting your current open application or window, but it's also then arranging the others around it. And then you have the ability to go into full screen or to basically move it to another Apple device, in this case to an iPad. Now, one of the things that is a little bit annoying is you do have to go through, you have to hover over the green light, you have to go ahead and select the option you want, and so it's not quite as seamless as you'd hope, and that's why I created a few shortcuts myself to be able to put windows to the left or the right, and we'll talk about that in the shortcuts option. But there's another aspect to the green light, which is notable. Now, if I don't hover over it and get this menu, then I can just go ahead and click on the green light, and that will basically create its own window. So I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to click. And so now you'll notice that there's no menu bar on top, and you don't have the applications icon tray on the bottom either. This application is filling the entire screen. So this basically is its own. You can think of it almost like being its own desktop. In fact, if I go ahead and do that 3-finger swipe, you'll notice that I've got the desktop here, I've got that window I just created here, and then I've got my Finder or File Explorer in the Windows world located there. You can navigate through these. First of all, I can select them, and then I can take my 3 fingers and swipe left or right to be able to get to each of these windows. So pretty cool. If you want your application to fill the entire screen, you can just click on it. Otherwise, you have to hover over the green, and then once the menu comes up, you select the item that you want. Thankfully, because all I care about is either having a full screen or left or the right, it was easy for me to create a few shortcuts so I don't have to bother with waiting for that menu to pop up. One last thing I will point out, that let's say that you want the screen to take up the entirety, but you don't necessarily want it to go into its own window. You still want it to be on your desktop. So one option that you can do is you go to that. Here I have News Plus, and just double click on the top bar. And by doing that, it will fill the entire screen. So I'm going to show you 7 keyboard shortcuts plus a bonus, one or two that I've created. And these are all keyboard shortcuts that I find are essential. I'm using them almost on a daily basis. So they're really helpful to know if you're making the transition to an Apple device. So we'll start with some of the most basic ones, and that would be, for example, copy. So copy is Command and C, so you hold the two buttons together and that will copy something. If you want to paste it, that would be Command and V, which is view. So you would click on that in order to paste it in. This is obviously really helpful, say in Microsoft Office, like in Excel or Word. But even if you want to basically copy a URL for a web page or some information on a web page, this is a really useful keyboard pair of shortcuts. Now, kind of on a similar vein, you have some quick navigation with using both the command as well as the arrow keys over here. So these will jump you around. Like for example, in Excel, if I have my cursor in a cell and I want to jump to the next item, I can go down in a row or I can go across columns. So that's very useful. In addition to that, if I want to highlight an area, I would pick Command Shift and then the arrow key. So for example, I could do Command Shift and go to the right and go down, for example, to highlight some table of data. So that's some very useful basic keyboard shortcuts that we have in Windows, and they're here in Apple as well. Now, one of the things that you don't have on the Apple device is the snipping tool that Windows has. But there is an equivalent, and the equivalent is done by doing Command Shift, and then number 4, you hold those three things together, and you'll get a crosshairs, and then you can highlight the area that you want, and that will be a screen capture. So it'll capture an image of the screen. On a similar basis, if I go Command, Shift, and 5, that is the screen recording function, and it creates an MP4 file of whatever you record. And there's a little bit more features that come up on a pop-up window. So one of my favorite and really helpful keyboard shortcuts is how do you close an application down. So we know that the red button in the stoplight will close a window, but it won't necessarily close that application. And if you're like me, I like to keep things kind of tidy. If I'm not using an application, I like to have it closed, and that way I don't have to worry about it taking up resources and creating some sort of kind of bottleneck. Now, I actually haven't had that experience in this computer, but I just have learned over the years to kind of keep things as simple as possible. Anyway, the shortcut to just close down any application, regardless of where you are in that application, is Command Q. So it's a very nice shortcut. So if all I have to do is validate that I'm in that application, and I'll look at the upper left corner of the screen to see the name of the active application, and then just do Command Q, and it's going to go ahead and eliminate that. Really cool. Now, the last keyboard shortcut that I want to show is one I've actually created myself. And so I don't do a lot in terms of tiling windows. I just like sometimes either the entire screen to be filled with a window or the left and the right to be filled with 2 windows. So I just do side by side. I don't do top or bottom. I don't do a grid of 4. I don't do things in thirds. Pretty much just, the full screen or the left and the right. I couldn't find a keyboard shortcut to make an application go to either the left or the right, so I created one of my own. And I basically defined it as Control Option, and then the left key will put that window to the left, and the right key will make that window to the right. And those are the bonus keyboard shortcuts. An example of how you would set up shortcuts. And basically I'm in the settings window, and I've gone all the way down here to my keyboard. And if I click on this button that says Keyboard Shortcuts, and I go down to the Apps Shortcuts button, I'm going to go ahead and expand it. And here's where I have created my 2 shortcuts. So I've had to basically describe it by typing this in there and then associating it with these three keys. That is Control, Option, and the left arrow to move the window to the left, and then Control, Option, and the right arrow to move the window to the right. So I had to do a little bit of internet sleuthing to figure this out, but once you have it set up, those keys will work for you, forever until you either delete these commands or something odd happens, I suppose. So in the other video, I talked about one of the big things you kind of have to let go if you're going to make the transition from Windows to a Mac computer is around gaming. And it's not that you can't do gaming on a Mac computer, but clearly, a state-of-the-art rig, or maybe state-of-the-art's a little heavy-handed, but just a modern rig that has a really good NVIDIA GPU processor is going to be your best bet in terms of a gaming machine that plays like the latest games. But that doesn't mean you can't game on the Mac. And here I have my Mac Mini, which has an M4 Pro chip. I've got my Sony PlayStation controller, which is connected via Bluetooth, and just recently released is Cyberpunk 2077. And in this case, I actually purchased the game on the App Store, but you can also play it through Steam or other stores as well. But I just wanted to show off real quickly, I'm going to walk around here in my apartment, and you can basically see how smooth the game looks. I don't have an overlay that shows FPS, but what I can tell you is that I really just don't notice any type of lost frames. It feels fairly smooth to me. Despite the fact that it's running on a device that doesn't technically have, absolutely doesn't have an NVIDIA GPU. It has an integrated GPU into the main processor chip. Really quite impressive. So while yes, it's true that the most cutting edge gaming isn't necessarily going to be available on your Mac. That is, unless it's available in a service like GeForce Now, which uses cloud computing. So you don't really need your computer to do the processing. You just need a good internet connection. But you can still play really good games on a Mac. And I've been enjoying this so far. I'm only a little bit over an hour in, but I did have a fight where there was about 7 other NPCs active all at the same time, and I noticed no performance dips at all. One thing you will notice is that the device will really get hot. You can touch it without burning yourself, but you can feel the heat. You don't really hear it. The fan is really silent on my Mac Mini, but yeah, that heat definitely gets up there. But I've played, for an hour with that heat at that level, and I've never seen the performance drop as a result. So yes, Windows machines are still the best if you're a serious gamer, but more and more you can do really good gaming on a Mac device, and this is just a latest example of that. So there you have it. I'm going on strong with my Mac, and especially with thanks to these shortcuts that I've learned to use over time, which make life a lot easier, understanding the Streetlight functionalities better, and even gaming, which is something that I was kind of prepared to let go to some degree, but maybe not as much as I originally had thought. Now, there's no question that gaming is still something that if you're really serious about it, particularly around being cutting edge and with the latest in graphical fidelity, then Windows machines are still the area that you're going to look. But you don't have to sacrifice as much going to Apple as maybe what was once the case. And, the future looks fairly bright for Apple in order to slowly take on AAA titles and potentially as well as indies too. So there's a lot of things that you can do from a gaming perspective with an Apple device, even though Windows would still be your preferred. My overall conclusion from the previous video still stands, and I think it's worth reiterating. Do I think that the Mac OS system is better than Windows? And I don't think I'd go that far. I know people that would, but my personal experience is that I like it. It's different. It has its strengths. It also has its weaknesses, just like Windows does. But I just appreciate having done Windows for 30 years to do something different. It was just time for me. And I appreciate what the Mac can do. My biggest recommendation for people considering the switch is you have to have the capacity for some curiosity and some learning. It's not going to be tremendous. The learning curve isn't gigantic, but you've got to be willing to kind of take a little bit of time to learn some of the little nuances, like the things that we've talked about in this video, or else you might find the transition to be fairly miserable. So if you don't have that interest in kind of learning something new, then I just wouldn't make the transition. I don't think it's so compelling to come to Apple that that you would make it regardless. I think it's worth considering. I think for a lot of people, the hardware in particular is compelling. But again, you just have to have that willingness to spend a little bit of time to invest yourself in learning the new system. And if you're willing to do that, then it's might be worth consideration. But if not, you know what, Windows is still good. And I can't, as much as I'm preferring Apple, a large degree, it's because it's something new and something different. That's particularly why I appreciate it. And pretty much anything you need to do, you can do on a Mac, and anything you need to do, you can do on a Windows machine as well. So preferences play a huge part as opposed to necessity. Okay, I hope that was helpful update. If you have any questions or any thoughts, of course, always pop those in the chat, and I reply to most when I can. And I look forward to reading those, and I also look forward to seeing you in my next video.